Hey, I'm really excited to announce that in April of next year, I'll be presenting at the Master Summit with Nick Webster about the APIs. This is going to be a brand new Qlik Master Summit track specifically for the APIs. So it's going to be a 3-day class, and in this class, Nick and I are going to be going very deep on how to use the engine and Qlik Core kind of at scale. So how do you really architect solutions with it? How does it work at the highest and lowest levels? And what are the best practices for getting kind of optimal performance and maintainability out of it? So we're really excited to do this course and kind of share a lot of this information we've picked up over the years from doing many projects with Qlik APIs and the Qlik engine, and now getting deep with Qlik Core. I want to give you a quick preview of some of that material we're going to be covering in April. It's going to be in Stockholm, by the way. Forgot to mention that. So on Friday of that session, I'm going to be talking a little bit about object architecture and performance. And so object architecture in the engine is extremely important to understand if you want to create truly dynamic interfaces with the Qlik engine. When I say dynamic interfaces, I'm talking about interfaces that are manipulatable. So one of the kind of most common requests that I get from clients when I'm building solutions on top of the Qlik APIs is to make the interface customizable. Let's say we have a chart on the screen that shows sales by month. Inevitably, we're going to get a question from a stakeholder that's going to be like, hey, can we change that to like a drop down so I can select sales by quarter or sales by year? Or maybe I can change the measure or change the sorting on the fly. So there's a lot of need or desire from users to be able to fully customize their experience on the front end, on the fly, as they're using an application. And Qlik is really good at doing this if you know how to correctly manipulate the objects. So we're going to be talking about that at the API track on the third day. I'll give you a quick preview of some of the concepts that we'll be going over related to that. So with Qlik objects, you really have two different types of views on their data. One is called the properties and the other is called the layout. And we're going to go deep on what both of these mean and when it's appropriate to use them at the Master Summit. But essentially, in a nutshell, the properties are more of kind of a back-end definition of what the object should contain. Kind of like a recipe for what the object is supposed to represent. While the layout is sort of like the final output of that recipe. It's the actual data generated by that recipe. So let's look at some examples here real quick. I have a little Node.js script I've put together where I'm using Enigma.js and I'm hooking into a local instance of Qlik Core, and I'm opening a data model I had sitting around with data about the opioid crisis in the United States. And I'm pulling an object, and this object specifically is a mapping object that exists inside the QVF. So it's representing a map. I think I got this QVF probably from like a Qlik Sense user at some point. And so in this, I'm pulling two different types of views in the data. I'm pulling the properties of the object and the layout. And if we just log out the properties first and see what those look like. What we're going to find is sort of the definition of the data that goes into that object. So here we see a QHyperCube definition coming on this object, and that hypercube definition defines the table of data for that mapping object. So I can see there's some dimensions here, and the dimension is opioid treatment geo, and we have some sorting, figured out some other row type of things going on here, and other types of properties of the object. So this is what defines that object, and if I wanted to manipulate that, I would actually manipulate the properties themselves. So if I wanted to change the dimension, this is where I would do that. On the other side of the spectrum, if I want to consume the information, that's when I want to work with the layout. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the properties here, and let's look at what the layout has for us. Let's run this script again. And we'll see now coming out is actually a lot more data. So this kind of information here are actually cells in the data showing me here's kind of a latitude and longitude point that my mapping object's going to use, and any other data related to it, like if there was some numerical data or measures or things like that. Now in this example, it's just plotting data. So that's the flip side of the coin. Now with the layout, I can't actually change the architecture of the object. I can't change how it's being sorted by Qlik or what dimension it's using and things like that, but I can view the data. And I can page the data and figure out what part of the data I want to look at and how to manipulate it from there, or even make selections back into the data. So the layout is what people are usually used to working with because they use it to render data, such as like in the extension world, people use the layout often for rendering. Whereas properties is more for when you want to manipulate the structure behind that data. And in the class, we're going to talk about several ways to do that. There are several strategies, including what's called applying patches, where you can selectively say, I want to change this one small piece of the properties of that object. Or you could change the entire set of properties at once using a function like setProperties. Or if you have a more complex object that has children object underneath it, you could use something called setFullPropertyTree. And so the complex objects I'm talking about, you may have worked with them before if you've worked with Qlik Sheets. So Qlik Sense sheets have what are called objects on them, like visualization objects, and those actually exist as child objects of the parent object, of the sheet object. So the sheet is the parent and the visualization is the child. What's cool about Qlik is you can build this hierarchy as deep as you want. So it gives you some flexibility to build some very complex hierarchical structures for your applications directly into your Qlik structure. And if you know how to manipulate things like setFullPropertyTree and getFullPropertyTree, then you can actually work more effectively with these more complex structures. So in the class, we'll talk more about the properties and the layouts, and we'll go deeper on when and how to use apply patches, when and how for setProperties, and when and how for setFullPropertyTree. So if you can make it, I hope to see you there.